Wait a minute. Is there something wrong with this floor plan? The moment the thought crossed my mind, I felt something in the back of my head give a sharp, brittle crack. It was a familiar-looking diagram, a collection of neat squares and lines printed on a single sheet of paper that still carried the faint, clean scent of a new build. It showed everything you'd expect: a master bedroom for my son and his wife, 2 rooms for the children, a storage closet, a guest room, and a spacious, open-plan living and dining area. But no matter how many times I scanned the page, no matter how closely I looked, I couldn't find that room. I asked a single, simple question. This house, where is my room? The two of them, my son Michael and his wife Sarah, glanced at each other for just a fraction of a second. In the next instant, I could have sworn they were trying to hide a small smile, as if I had misunderstood something fundamental, as if I were a child asking a silly question. What? Oh, Dad, you'll only be coming over now and then, right? We figured the sofa would be plenty comfortable for you, Michael said, a little too casually. That's right, Sarah added, her voice bright. When you stay over, you can just relax here in the living room. It'll be nice. And cozy, don't you think? And just like that, I understood. Only a few months earlier, I had given them $75,000. My money. To help build this very house. Let's all live together, Dad. It'll be wonderful. 3 generations under one roof. Those were the words they had used, and I had believed them without a single shred of doubt. If I could go back and talk to the man I was then, I'd grab him by the shoulders and say, "Hey, wake up, you old fool." I should never have let myself hope. Believing them, trusting them. That was my mistake. My eyes drifted to the white sofa pushed against the far wall of the living room. It was neat and tidy, with perfectly plumped cushions, but it was an anonymous piece of furniture. There was no name on it. There was certainly no feeling that said, "This is your place." I said nothing more. I quietly folded the floor plan, tucked it into my coat pocket, and turned around. Without another word, I walked out of the house. On the way home, a crisp autumn wind snaked its way under my collar. Everything felt cold. The air, the pavement, the darkening sky. But deep inside my chest, in the place where my heart was supposed to be, there was a coldness that was far deeper, far more chilling. Tea? I'd almost forgotten, I thought to myself as I walked. I still have an ace up my sleeve. Tucked away in the deepest corner of my wallet was an old, worn key. And with it, the memory of an asset from my past that I had never told a soul about. And no, this wasn't over. I was not finished yet. My name is Arthur Miller. For most of my life, I've lived in a small town on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, surrounded by the tall pines and Douglas firs that define this part of the country. I was a woodworker, a carpenter, for 40 years. My days started at 5 in the morning, with a saw in my hand, and they didn't end until the sun went down and my fingertips were trembling with exhaustion. The pay was never great, but it was an honest living. I poured my soul into my work, treating every post and beam I shaped as if it had a name, a life of its own. When I was younger, my wife, Helen, used to scold me all the time. "Arthur, you have to rest more," she'd say, her brow furrowed with worry. But it's a funny thing, no matter how tired I was, no matter how much my body ached, all of it would melt away the moment I sat down for dinner and heard the sound of my family's laughter filling our little house. That was all the reward I ever needed. Helen passed away 12 years ago. Lung cancer. By the time they found it, it was already too late. I remember her in that sterile hospital room, her body so frail, offering me a small, weak smile. "I'll just be going on ahead of you," she whispered, and then she was gone. I've lived by myself ever since, in the same old one-story house we shared. The floors get cold in the winter, and the summer breeze seems to blow right through the walls. But I could never bring myself to leave. Sometimes, if I was quiet enough, I felt like I could still hear her voice echoing in the hallways. And that was a comfort I couldn't bear to part with. Juan, now, I have 2 children. My son, Michael, is 46 this year. He works in construction, just like his old man in a way, though on a much grander scale. He was always a clever boy, good with his hands. I remember him getting a model airplane kit for his birthday once. He had the whole thing built and painted by the next morning. When he was in grade school, he told me with his eyes shining, "I'm going to be a guy who builds houses when I grow up." I can still see the look on his face as clear as day. My other child is my daughter, Emily. She's married now and lives all the way on the East Coast. But she never fails to call me every single week. She says just hearing my voice helps her feel settled. "Dad, are you eating your vegetables?" she'll ask. Or, "It's starting to get cold out there. I'm sending you a new heated blanket." Every one of those simple words is like a warm ember, gently warming my old heart. And then, one day, the phone rang. It was Michael. "We want to build a new house," he told me. "A multi-generational home." "You're getting older, Dad," he said, his voice earnest. "It would give us all such peace of mind if you came to live with us. And besides, the grandkids adore you." Hearing those words made my chest swell with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I had grown so accustomed to sitting at my dinner table alone, the silence my only companion. The invitation felt like a dream, a lifeline pulling me back into the fold of a family. The chance to be near my son, to watch my grandchildren grow up right before my eyes. I thought to myself that for the rest of my years, that would be more than enough. There was just one problem. They were short on the funds needed to build the house. I didn't hesitate for a second. "Then use this," I told him. I handed over $75,000, part of the proceeds from a piece of land I had sold years ago, a small plot out in the country that had been in our family for generations. As I presented him with the bank check, Michael's eyes went wide. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, at a complete loss for words. "Dad, are you really sure about this?" he finally managed to ask. "It's meant to be used when it's needed," I said, offering him a smile. "If it's for your family's home, then I have no regrets." At that moment, I truly, wholeheartedly believed it. I was certain that I was securing a place where I could spend the rest of my days surrounded by family. I was sure that this choice, this sacrifice, would lead to nothing but happiness. The months that followed were filled with a giddy excitement, as if I were building a new home for myself. I'd spend hours poring over the blueprints Michael sent me, my finger tracing the lines. "This must be the grandkids' room," I'd mumble to myself. "And this little space here, maybe this will be my bedroom." I let my imagination run wild, painting a beautiful picture of the future. I even visited the construction site once. It happened to be the day the framing was going up, and the rhythmic sound of hammers echoed through the air. The house was just a skeleton of timber and beams, but as I stood there watching the carpenters at work, my heart swelled with an indescribable joy. "See, Dad? That's going to be the living room over there," Michael explained, pointing. "And we're putting in a big vaulted ceiling here to let in all that morning sun." His voice was filled with a pride that was palpable, and all I could do was nod, a lump forming in my throat. The clean, sharp scent of freshly cut wood drifted on the breeze, carrying me back to my younger days. "Ah, this is what I used to do," I thought. I used to build homes just like this. I let my mind wander through each space, giving it life. The entryway was designed to be wide, with almost no steps. It would be safe, even when my legs got weaker. The bathroom was planned to have grab bars installed, and a deep, warm bathtub. When Michael mentioned that there was even a little nook in the corner of the living room where I could eventually set up a small shelf for a picture of Helen, my eyes grew hot with tears. And then there was the second floor, with the children's bedrooms and one other room. This must be it, I thought, looking up at the empty frame where the walls would soon be. This is where my room will be. I took a deep, steadying breath, filling my lungs with the smell of new lumber and the distant call of a crow. Everything felt like it was celebrating the beginning of our family's renewal, a new chapter for all of us. Even though it was just a concrete foundation with a wooden frame, to me, it already looked like a magnificent castle. On the drive home, I found myself looking up at the sky, speaking to my late wife as if she were sitting right there beside me. "The day has finally come, Helen. We're all going to be living together again. I wish you could have seen this." In the weeks that followed, I began the slow process of packing up my old house, picturing my new life in every box I filled. I carefully wrapped the picture frames I could never part with, and Helen's favorite porcelain teacup found a soft bed in a box of old towels. My intention was clear. In this new house, she and I would live on together. And so, on the day of the move, my heart was overflowing with anticipation. I imagined my grandchildren's smiling faces, the lively chatter around a full dinner table, the simple comfort of falling asleep at night under a warm blanket, knowing my family was just down the hall. My old age, my final years, were finally returning to their rightful place, within the heart of my family. I believed it with every fiber of my being. But that beautiful, hopeful dream was about to come crashing down. And it would all start with a single, casual comment just a few days later. It was perhaps that one sentence that marked the beginning of the end. With the move just around the corner, we had a rare chance to have dinner together as a family. The meal was a special one, my favorite pot roast and mashed potatoes, with a side of green beans. And on my plate sat a small, slightly lopsided dinner roll that my grandson had proudly presented to me. "For you, Grandpa. I helped make it," he beamed, holding it out. Seeing that pure, innocent smile, I felt my eyes well up. But the warm, loving atmosphere that filled the room suddenly turned cold, all because of a few careless words. "By the way, Arthur," my daughter-in-law Sarah began, "you're one of those people who prefers a simple bed, right? Not one of those big, soft mattresses?" I chuckled and nodded. "That's me. A firm mattress on a simple frame is all I need. I never could get used to those fancy pillow top things." She kept that same pleasant smile on her face as she said, "That's good to know. You see, my parents' guest room is really quite spacious. It's so nice for them to have their own dedicated space when they visit, you know? It's just, we're a little tight on space here, so arranging something like that is a bit difficult for us." What? For a moment, I couldn't process what she had said. It sounded like casual small talk, but underneath, I could hear a different message loud and clear. "My parents have a room, but you don't." "Is that so?" I said, trying to keep my voice as calm and steady as possible. "Well then, I suppose I should ask, where will I be sleeping?" My son, Michael, was silent for a moment before he finally spoke up. Well, for now, I guess you'll be sleeping in the living room. We have a nice fold-out cot," he added quickly. "And if we need to, we can always clear out a corner and make some space for you." Hearing those words, I felt a creeping cold spread through my chest. For now, if we need to, what he was really saying was, "Your place in this house has not been decided yet." I stopped eating, my fork hovering over my plate. I just stared down at the steam rising from my mashed potatoes. The dinner that had felt so warm and comforting just moments before now tasted like ash in my mouth. But still, I smiled. I forced a laugh. "Oh, don't you worry about an old man like me. I can sleep just about anywhere," I said, trying my best not to ruin the evening. Back in my day, I used to fall asleep on a pile of wood shavings in the workshop. Michael and Sarah seemed relieved. They didn't appear to notice anything was wrong and quickly changed the subject. But that night, long after the house was quiet, I lay alone in my bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the familiar cracks in my bedroom ceiling. What if it's true? What if there really is no room for me? Quote, was the invitation to live together just a pretense, a means to an end? It wasn't quite anxiety I was feeling, but a deep sense of dissonance, a feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The pieces weren't fitting together, but I couldn't yet see the full picture. The next day, I drove out to the construction site by myself. The work had progressed significantly. They were well into the interior finishing. I tipped my hat to the crew and asked if I could take a quick look inside. The hallways were bright, the placement of the windows thoughtful and deliberate. The kitchen was spacious, and I could easily imagine the family gathering there. In the kids' rooms upstairs, they had already hung curtains. But nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did I see my name. None of the walls, none of the doors, not a single space in that entire house seemed to be speaking to me, saying, "This is your place, you belong here." So, Marco. One of the younger carpenters mumbled to me in a low voice, "Where's your room gonna be?" "That's a good question," I replied, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "I'm not quite sure myself." I let out a long, deep sigh on the drive home. Maybe I was just worrying too much. Maybe this was all a big misunderstanding. But the feeling that something was terribly wrong, wouldn't go away. That night, back in my own house, I went to the hall closet and pulled out an old wooden box from the very back. Inside, tucked beneath decades of memories, were certain documents I had kept hidden for a very long time. What was in that box would become important later on, but for now, it was just a secret. From that night forward, I began to ask myself the same questions before I fell asleep. Am I truly being welcomed into this home? Or am I just being used? The questions echoed in the darkness, and the silence that followed squeezed my heart tighter and tighter with each passing night. On the morning of the move, I was awake before the sun. My old suitcase and a couple of cardboard boxes, which I had packed the night before, sat waiting quietly by the front door. They held only the bare essentials: my clothes, my favorite mug, a framed photograph of Helen, and the old wind-up alarm clock that had woken me up every morning for the past 50 years. It wasn't much, but to me, those boxes contained my entire life. No specific time had been arranged for my arrival. "Just come over whenever you're ready, Dad, once things have settled down a bit," Michael had said, but in my own mind, I had marked this day on the calendar with a single, powerful thought. Today is the day I start living with my family again. I called a taxi for myself and, with the driver's help, loaded my suitcase into the trunk. "Starting a new chapter, huh?" "That's wonderful," the driver said cheerfully. I managed a vague, non-committal smile in response. When we arrived, the house still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. The front gate was open, and a few stray moving boxes were still piled up on the porch. As I rang the doorbell, I could hear the sound of children's laughter and lively conversation from inside. The door swung open a moment later, and there, stretched out before me, was the scene. My entire family gathered in the living room, celebrating with a bucket of fried chicken and cans of beer. I hesitated for a beat, then put on a smile and said, "Hello, everyone." "Grandpa!" one of my grandsons shouted, running over to give me a hug. His smile was the warmest thing I had felt all day. But then, his younger brother looked over with a puzzled expression and asked, "Huh? Is Grandpa moving in today too?" For a split second, the words caught in my throat. I forced a small laugh and knelt down to his level. "That's right, buddy," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Today is Grandpa's moving day. I was so excited to come and finally live with all of you." From the living room, I heard a few muffled, indifferent replies. "Oh, right. And welcome, Dad?" But no one stood up to greet me. No one offered to help. As I struggled to drag my heavy suitcase over the threshold by myself, a cold, hard realization settled in my gut. Ah, I see now. It wasn't just my room that didn't exist in their plans. My arrival didn't exist in their plans either. After I had set my luggage down in a corner, out of the way, my gaze fell upon the coffee table. There was no plate for me, no fork, no glass. No one had even thought to set a place for me. I knew none of them meant any harm by it. There was no malice in their actions, but the message was clear all the same. I was not being treated as a member of the family, but as an occasional relative who had dropped by unexpectedly. And that quiet, aching loneliness began to seep deep into my bones. On the day of the move, I made my way to the new house a little later in the day. "There's going to be so much to unload first, Dad, and it'll be really chaotic. Why don't you just come over in the evening?" Michael had suggested a few days before. When I pulled up to the curb, the family's cars were already parked in the driveway, and I could hear boisterous laughter spilling from the living room window. I rang the bell, and my grandson swung the door open with a wide grin. "Grandpa, you're late." "Sorry, buddy." "I took my time," I said, ruffling his hair. He led me into the living room where the whole family was assembled. The coffee table was covered with pizza boxes, a bucket of fried chicken, and paper cups filled with soda. It felt less like a move-in day and more like a party. I quietly took off my shoes by the door, my eyes taking in the scene of this new life spread out before me. But I couldn't seem to find a place for myself in it. After a few minutes, Michael came over and handed me a shiny new key. "Here you go, Dad. This is for the house." I took it from him, the cold metal resting in my palm. I looked him in the eye and asked the question that had been weighing on me for days. "By the way, which room will be mine?" Michael's gaze flickered away for just a second. Then Sarah appeared from the kitchen, a bright, practiced smile on her face. "Arthur," she began, her tone gentle and reasonable. "We were thinking, since you're so used to living on your own, you'd probably be most comfortable just using a corner of the living room. Here, on the nights you decide to stay over," she continued smoothly, "we can set up the folding bed for you. You can just use this space as a combined dining and sleeping area. It'll be nice and simple." For a moment, I was speechless. The air left my lungs. "I see," I finally managed to say, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "So, in other words, there is no private room for me." "That's right. I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with polite regret. "We were just a bit limited on the number of rooms this time, and with the kids needing their own space to study and do their homework," her explanation was. Perfectly courteous. But it lacked one crucial thing: any trace that my existence had ever been a part of their plan. I replayed the floor plan in my mind. The master bedroom, the two kids' rooms, the guest room for visitors, probably her parents, the storage closet, and the large, open-plan living room. Nowhere was there a space designated Dad's room. It hadn't just been forgotten, it had never been considered in the first place. I walked slowly back to the living room and sat down on the white sofa. Around me, my grandchildren were laughing and shouting as they played a video game, and the adults were chatting animatedly. But to my ears, the sounds were distant and muffled, as if they were coming from a television in another world. A single, devastating thought rose from the depths of my mind. This is a house where I don't exist. Just then, my grandson paused his game and looked over at me, his expression one of pure, childish innocence. "Hey, Mom," he asked, his voice cutting through the noise. "Is Grandpa just having a sleepover tonight? Or are you going home again?" My daughter-in-law laughed, a light, airy sound, and replied for me. "That's right, honey. Grandpa's just going to stay with us for a little while, and then he'll go back to his own house." "I see. So that's what I was. I was a temporary visitor." I kept the smile fixed on my face and reached out to ruffle my grandson's hair. "Yep," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "I just came over to see all of you today." But behind that smile, I felt a sharp, shearing pain, a distinct sensation, as if a piece of my own heart was being carefully carved out and set aside. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I went to the storage closet in the hallway to look for a blanket. It was a small, cramped space tucked into a corner of the house, a place that was clearly not meant for daily use. Cardboard boxes were stacked high against one wall, and an old, dust-covered vacuum cleaner stood guard beside them. I flipped the switch, and a single fluorescent tube overhead flickered and buzzed for a few moments, before casting a cold, sterile light over the room. The air was thick with the smell of dust and cardboard, and it tickled my nose, making me let out a sudden sneeze. There, stacked among the other boxes, was a suitcase I recognized as my own, and right next to it was an old brown cardboard box, the flaps held down with a long strip of packing tape. Scrawled across the tape in thick, black permanent marker were two words: "Grandpa's stuff." The moment my eyes fell on those words, I felt something inside my chest shift and click into place, a final, definitive sound. I slowly knelt in front of the box. My knees protested with a dull ache, but I barely noticed. Inside, my clothes, my toiletries, the small framed photograph of my late wife, Helen, and the book I was halfway through reading had all been tossed in, together without any care or order. The box had been set down right next to a plastic bucket filled with cleaning, rags, and a bottle of floor polish, and somehow, it didn't look out of place at all. It looked like it belonged there. Ah, so this is where I'm kept. In that instant, I felt as if I were no longer a human being, I was an object, a piece of luggage to be taken out only when needed. I felt like the window fan we used to have. The one we'd haul out of the basement every July and then shove back into the darkness after Labor Day. Or the old space heater we only plugged in when the first real frost hit. I was a piece of seasonal equipment, meant to serve a temporary purpose and then be stored away, left to gather dust until my season came around again. I pushed myself back to my feet, my joints creaking in protest, and brushed the dust from the knees of my trousers with my hands. The blanket I had come for was wedged underneath the box. I pulled it out gently, folded it over my arm, and quietly closed the closet door. My footsteps seemed to echo unnaturally loudly on the wooden floor of the hallway as I walked back to the living room. There was no one around to see me, but for some reason, I found myself straightening my back, pulling my shoulders square, and walking with as much dignity as I could muster. Back in the corner of the living room, as I spread the blanket over the narrow folding cot, I whispered the words to myself. Into the quiet of the house. This is just a temporary place. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, as if giving voice to the thought would make it permanent, would solidify a reality I wasn't ready to face. But later that night, wrapped in a thin, cold blanket, I knew the truth with absolute certainty. In this house, I didn't truly exist. Lying there on the folding cot in the corner of the living room, I stared up at the unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling. Every time I shifted my weight, the metal frame of the bed groaned and squeaked, a lonely sound in the dark. A drying rack stood in the opposite corner of the room, draped with someone else's laundry, and my own luggage remained unopened, still packed in the cardboard boxes I'd left by the hallway door. I reached into the small bag I kept by the bed and carefully took out the framed photo of Helen. It was a small, simple frame that I carried with me everywhere I went. "Are you listening, Helen?" I whispered, my voice barely a rustle in the silence. "In this house, I don't exist. I'm here, physically, but there's no place for me." "Not really." In the photograph, Helen was smiling her quiet, gentle smile. Then, so quietly that I could barely hear it myself, I added another thought. Maybe this isn't my final home after all. A week passed. I lived my life according to the unspoken rules of my new reality. I slept on the folding cot in the corner of the living room. During the day, I would fold it up and push it against the wall to keep it out of the way. My belongings remained in their cardboard boxes in the storage closet, and I would retrieve only what I needed for the day. My coffee mug found a home in the very back of a kitchen cabinet, behind all the others. The toothbrush I had bought for myself stood by itself in the corner of the bathroom counter. The word temporary hung over everything, explaining it all without another word ever being said. One evening, as I was getting ready to turn in, I heard quiet voices coming from the master bedroom down the hall. "Hey, this isn't what we agreed on. Is your father planning on staying here for good? It's been a week already, Sarah. We have our own lives, our own routines." The voices belonged to my son and his wife. I couldn't make out every word, but I understood the gist of it. It was about me. "At first you said it would only be for 1 week a month, right? If this keeps up, where are the kids supposed to do their homework?" I slowly, quietly, pulled the blanket up over my head and closed my eyes, shutting out the sound. No one was to blame. It wasn't about finding fault. It was just a fact. As simple and as hard as stone, there was no place for me here. I was in the way. The next morning, my son, Michael, came over to me as I was finishing my coffee. He was holding an envelope. "This is for you, Dad," he said, handing it to me. A little present. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a beautifully designed travel brochure, an invitation to a 2-week retreat at a Florida seaside resort. "I was thinking you must be tired after everything," Michael said, his voice full of practiced concern. "A change of scenery would do you good. Go relax, enjoy the warm weather. And while you're gone, it'll give us a chance to sort out the storage, get the house a little more organized." I stared at the brochure in my hand for a long moment, then I manufactured a smile. After he walked away, I sat down in my corner of the living room and slowly, deliberately, pulled the contents from the envelope. There was the glossy brochure and a single travel voucher. Printed across the front in a fancy, flowing script were the words, "A Golden Years Getaway. 2 weeks of healing and relaxation in sunny Florida." A bitter smile touched my lips. Golden years. The words felt so clinical, so impersonal, as if they were meant for a category, not a person. I flipped the voucher over. My eyes scanned the fine print. Terms and conditions. Single occupancy only. Companions. Not permitted. Guests are responsible for their own transportation to and from the resort. All dining packages are arranged for individual guests. I read the words over and over again. My gaze moved slowly, taking in every letter, but nowhere, not in the brochure, not on the voucher, was there any mention of family, of sharing memories, of enjoying time together. A trip for one, a room for one, a meal for one. It felt like a rehearsal, a simulation for a lonely old age. Through the window, I could see my grandchildren kicking a soccer ball around the backyard. From the kitchen, I could hear the sound of the faucet running. This house was filled with life, with family. But the world described on this piece of paper contained only my time. No, that wasn't right. It was a world where there was only May. "Ah, I get it," I murmured to no one. This wasn't a gift, it wasn't a vacation. It was a message, delivered politely. "We need you to go away for a while." As I traced the edge of the paper with my finger, I suddenly heard Helen's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. "Arthur, you always were the last one to catch on." She was right. I finally understood. This wasn't my home, and I had become someone they wouldn't miss if I never came back. Still, I made myself smile. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes, but I pushed it down, slid the voucher back into its envelope, and quietly stood up. "Thank you," I said, finding Michael in the kitchen. "You really shouldn't have. This is too much." "Not at all, Dad. We need you to stay healthy and happy, you know." The conversation was perfectly pleasant, but that kindness, that carefully applied veneer of concern, was what hurt the most. It was a dismissal tied up with a pretty bow. I went back to my corner and quietly packed my things. There wasn't much to pack. One suitcase, one cardboard box. Both of them were already waiting, untouched, just as I'd left them in the storage closet. That afternoon, I called a taxi. When it arrived, I met it at the curb. My grandson came running out the front door. "Grandpa, where are you going?" he asked. "I'm just going to a resort for a little while. To get some sun." "No fair. You get to go all by yourself?" His innocent complaint made me smile. A real one this time. "Well, how about we go together next time, okay?" I got into the car and pulled the door shut. No one else came out to see me off. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked in the side mirror. I could see the house, a perfect picture of a happy family. But in that picture, my own image felt transparent, like a ghost they couldn't even see. This was not my house. When I arrived at the resort, I gave my name at the front desk and received the key card to my room. It was a spacious suite with a king-sized bed and a small balcony that overlooked the ocean. I changed into the plush robe the hotel provided, went down to the spa for a long soak in the hot tub, and then came back to the room and stretched out on the bed. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contact list. My finger paused on Helen's name, the number still saved after all these years. I stared at it and spoke to her in a low murmur. "What would you have done, Helen?" I'm not saying they kicked me out, not in so many words, but this is their way of saying, "Stay away," isn't it? Through the wall, I could hear the faint sound of laughter from the room next door. But inside my suite, there was only a profound and heavy silence. That night, I had a dream. I was back in our old house, the small, drafty one we lived in for so many years. It was always cold in the winter, but in the evenings, the kitchen was filled with the steam from a simmering pot on the stove and the warm sound of our family's laughter. When I woke up, one thing was settled in my mind. I was not going back to that new house. Not ever. It was the only decision I had left that was truly my own. It was the evening of my second day at the resort. After a shower, I went down to the lobby and sat on a sofa in a quiet corner, sipping a tall glass of iced tea. Through the large windows in front of me, I could see the calm, dark ocean and the twinkling lights of the town below. I took out my phone and checked for notifications. There were none. No messages from anyone. Still, a part of me, a small, foolish part, had been hoping for something. I opened my social media app out of habit. And there, at the very top of my feed, was a photo filled with familiar faces. It was a picture of my family, gathered around the new dining room table. "Our first dinner in the new house," the caption read. Finally starting to feel settled in. It was a lively photo. My grandson was grinning from ear to ear. Sarah's home-cooked meal was spread across the table, and beside my son was a half-empty bottle of beer. There was a platter of fried chicken, a big bowl of potato salad, and even a small cake with a single candle for the occasion. I just stared at the screen, unable to say a word. I wasn't in the picture. My usual spot, the chair at the head of the table, was not empty. In its place, there was a small potted fern. Its delicate green leaves were catching the light from the overhead fixture, making the space look complete, intentional, as if a person had never been meant to sit there at all. I slowly lowered the hand holding the phone to my lap, and under my breath, I whispered the words that had finally become true. "I'm on the other side of the camera now. I'm the one who isn't in the picture anymore." At that moment, I felt something cold and heavy sink to the bottom of my soul. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't sadness. It was just a quiet, final understanding. My place at that table was gone. No one was to blame, but no one had even noticed. I got up and went back to my room. I looked at the small suitcase sitting by the door and was suddenly reminded of something. That old metal box, hidden in the back of the closet in my old house. The one Helen had told me was, for when you're really and truly in trouble. I had a powerful feeling that the key to picking myself back up was locked inside that box. I didn't sleep at all that night, and at the crack of dawn, I checked out of the resort, caught the first bus to the airport, and flew back to Portland. I was heading for the old, rented house in the Selwood neighborhood that I had left only weeks before. A single burning resolve was all that filled my chest. I am going to rebuild my own place, my own life, with my own two hands. That day, I found myself back at the resort, sitting in my room with the television on. I wasn't really watching anything. I was just killing time, holding the remote, flipping through channels without thinking. Cooking shows, travel documentaries, game shows, they all felt like they belonged to a different world, a world that had nothing to do with me. And then, a phrase caught my ear, a hidden gem of mid-century architecture, rediscovering Portland's Selwood neighborhood. I sat up straight. The name, Selwood, made something deep inside me stir. The scene on the screen changed, showing a quiet, tree-lined street. And then, there it was, a familiar two-story wooden house. The pale blue of the shutters, the terracotta planter on the porch steps, the old, tarnished brass numbers on the doorpost. There was no mistake. It was the house, our house, the one Helen and I had so carefully maintained for all those years. I instinctively reached for the remote and turned up the volume. The announcer's voice felt both distant and incredibly close. This home, built in the late 1950s, combines solid construction with a handcrafted warmth that makes it highly sought after in today's rental market, he was saying. It has been beautifully maintained, with the original entryway and roof tiles still perfectly preserved. As I stared at the image of the house on the screen, a strange feeling washed over me. It was as if my late wife was looking right out of the television at me, her voice a quiet whisper in my ear. "Arthur, don't you think it's time to come back?" Suddenly, I remembered her words from so long ago. "If you're ever in real trouble, you can always go back to that house. It's our final place, yours and mine." Her voice was so vivid, so clear. It was as if she had just spoken the words right beside me. I stood up and went to the dresser. In the back of the bottom drawer was the old wooden box I had packed, and tucked underneath it was the small, locked metal box. The moment I picked it up, the cold steel sent a chill through my palm, but its weight was strangely reassuring. I placed the box on the desk and turned the small key in the lock. Inside, just as I had left them, were the documents. All of them neatly organized by Helen's careful hand, the deed, the bank statements, the rental contracts, and on top of the pile was a single sheet of notepaper. On it, in her familiar handwriting, she had written, "I believe in you, Arthur, and you have a place. Don't you ever forget that." I read the words slowly, then read them again. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. And then I spoke clearly, a vow made in the silence of my heart. "I hear you, Helen. I understand. The place you gave us, this time, I'll protect it with my own two hands." I stood up again and gently placed the metal box inside my suitcase. All my hesitation was gone. The morning after I returned from Florida, I went back to the small rental house where I had lived for so many years. The air was cool and damp after a night of rain, and the familiar scent of old wood and worn carpets felt deeply comforting. I set down my bag, put a kettle on to boil, and then walked slowly to the old wooden dresser in the corner of the room. In the back of the bottom drawer, there it was, the metal box that hadn't been opened in decades. I remembered Helen's words, spoken with a serious look on her face. "This box, I want you to open it only if you're ever really and truly in trouble, Arthur." Like, thinking of her, I lifted the lid. Inside was a small stack of aging documents, a thin envelope, and a photograph of her as a young woman, carefully folded to protect it. With a slightly trembling hand, I picked up the first document. At the top, in official lettering, it read, "Property deed, City of Portland, County of Multnomah." It was for a small, two-story house in the Selwood neighborhood. A house she had bought herself, years before we were ever married. She had always told me about it. "This is our safe house," she would say. "Our nest egg, just in case anything ever happens." I had never pried, never asked for the details. I had simply nodded and trusted her. The next set of papers was 17 years' worth of rental agreements and bank deposit slips. The rent, collected faithfully every month, had been deposited into an account I never knew existed. I looked at the most recent statement. The balance had grown, steadily and silently, to over $170,000. It was the last secret we shared, our final asset, built without my ever knowing the full extent of it. I poured the hot water into my mug and held it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I stared up at the ceiling for a long time. In my mind, I asked Helen a quiet question. "Did you see this coming all along?" Of course, there was no reply, but in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. Now was the time to put her final gift to use. The next morning, I walked to a real estate office on a main street in Selwood. It had been a long time since I'd worn a suit, but as I stood in front of the mirror that morning, I felt a strange sense of resolve settle over me. The crisp fabric of the shirt, the familiar weight of the jacket, it all made my spine feel a little straighter, my shoulders a little broader. It was as if I was putting on a uniform for a battle I had finally decided to fight. I walked into the real estate office on Main Street and presented the agent. With my business card, I spoke quietly, but my voice didn't waver. "I would like to purchase the duplex in the Selwood neighborhood. In my name." At first, she seemed surprised. Maybe it was my age, or the plainness of my clothes, or perhaps the fact that I spoke with a quietness that people often mistake for uncertainty. But when I laid the documents and the bank statement from my safe deposit box on her desk, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. Her professional smile became one of genuine respect. "Of course, sir," she said, her tone changing completely. "And the buyer's name for the paperwork?" "Arthur Miller," I said. I spoke my own name, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it echoed in my ears with a sense of its own weight. It wasn't Dad. It wasn't Grandpa. It was my own name. The name of a man who existed on his own terms. The purchase process was remarkably smooth. With the funds readily available, there was no need for loans or lengthy approvals. The paperwork was straightforward, and it didn't take long to prepare everything. The property I had chosen was, by what felt like something more than mere coincidence, located in the same part of town as the new house my son had just built. It wasn't on the same street, not even in the same modern development, but it was close enough. Not too close, not too far. For the man I was becoming, it was the perfect distance. On the way back, I stopped at a small neighborhood coffee shop and ordered a cup of black coffee. I sat by the window, the warm ceramic mug a comfort in my hands, and watched the afternoon unfold outside. School children walked by in laughing, chattering groups, their colorful backpacks bouncing with every energetic step. I watched them and allowed a thought to surface, a simple truth that settled over me like a warm blanket. Experience from this day forward, my home, my place in this world will never again depend on someone else's convenience. That day at the dinner table, when there was no chair, no plate set for me, the cardboard box in the cramped storage closet, with Grandpa's stuff scrawled across it in black marker, and the travel voucher for the Florida resort, the fine print clearly stating, single occupancy only. It all made sense now. Every one of those small, quiet moments of exclusion had been an answer, and I had finally, after all this time, learned how to read it. They weren't acts of malice, but of simple, thoughtless truth. I was not part of the plan. When I got back to my small rental house, I walked over to the mantel where Helen's photograph had always stood. I gently picked up the silver frame and looked into her smiling eyes, the same ones that had looked at me with such unwavering love for over 40 years. "Thank you, Helen," I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Because of you, because of the foresight you had that I never did, I've finally been able to get my own place back." The woman in the picture said nothing, of course. She just kept smiling her quiet, gentle smile. But for some reason, at that moment, it seemed warmer, more knowing than ever before. It felt like an approval, a final blessing on the path I had chosen. On the evening the sale was officially finalized, after all the papers were signed and the keys were in my pocket, I stopped by the main post office downtown. I didn't go to the bustling counter, but instead made my way to one of the small, worn writing desks in the quietest corner of the lobby. I picked up the ballpoint pen chained to the desk and took out an envelope and a single, crisp sheet of stationery I had brought with me for this very purpose. There were so many things I could have written. A mountain of words was piled up inside me. My heart was crowded with explanations I felt I needed to give, with a deep, simmering anger I had suppressed for weeks, with a sadness that ran deeper than I could ever say. I could have filled pages with accusations, with questions, with the pain of a father who felt he had become invisible to his own son. But as I stood there, pen in hand, I chose to let all of it go. I decided that my final word on the matter would not be one of weakness or complaint. It would be one of strength. I wrote just one short, simple sentence. "Your father will no longer be living in a borrowed space. I am going home." That was everything. That was all that needed to be said. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't an accusation or a plea for sympathy. It was simply a declaration, quiet but absolute. From this day forward, I will walk my own path. After writing those few words, I folded the paper neatly into thirds and slipped it into the envelope. On the front, I wrote the address of the new house, the one I had helped build, and below it, my son's name, Michael Miller. I turned the envelope over and left the space for the return address completely, deliberately blank. There was no need for a reply. This was not the beginning of a conversation. It was the end of one. Instead of dropping the letter into one of the blue collection boxes outside, I took it to the counter. The act felt more final this way, more ceremonial. "First-class mail, please," I said to the clerk. She took it with a practiced hand, weighed it, and told me the cost. I paid with a few coins I had ready in my pocket. When she printed the receipt and held it out to me, I simply shook my head, gave her a small nod of thanks, and walked away. Outside, the sky was ablaze with the brilliant, bleeding colors of sunset. I stood on the wide stone steps of the post office, under that vast crimson sky, and took a deep, cleansing breath. The cool evening air filled my lungs and seemed to wash away the last remnants of bitterness and sorrow. I don't have to explain myself anymore. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. With that one sentence, mailed and sent on its way, I had taken back my life. I had reclaimed myself. On the way home, I stopped at a little antique shop I passed 100 times, but never entered. In the window was a small, handcrafted wooden box, made of dark cherry wood with a simple brass latch. I went inside and bought it. I decided I would keep my new house keys in it. A tangible symbol of this day, a way to mark it forever as a true, new beginning. That night, back in my rental for the last time, I stood before Helen's picture again. I poured a small glass of the sherry she used to enjoy and set it beside her frame, a small ritual we used to share on special occasions. I sent a letter to Michael today, I told her quiet, smiling face. I don't expect a reply. There was just one thing I needed him to know. Well, the photograph just smiled back at me. She didn't have to say a word. I could feel in her gentle, unwavering gaze that she understood everything. With the new key clutched firmly in my hand, I walked up the familiar flagstone path to the house in Selwood. It had been years since I had passed through its gate as anything other than a landlord checking on a property. The old oak door, the one I had hung myself 30 years ago, still had the same comforting, solid feel under my hand. The cracked blue tiles on the porch, the faint, clean scent of rain-soaked wood and damp earth. It all felt like it still held a piece of me, a faint echo of the life Helen and I had built within these walls. On the siding next to the front door, I could see the faint, sun-bleached outline where our old nameplate had once been. We had taken it down years ago when we first decided to rent the place out. From my bag, I took out a small, newly carved wooden plaque. It was made of the same dark cherry wood as the box I'd bought for my keys. With both hands, I held it up to the wall, aligning it perfectly with the ghost of the old one, and secured it in place with 2 brass screws. There was just one word carved into the dark, polished wood, a name that was once again mine to claim: Miller. The lettering was simple and classic, with no fancy embellishments. It was everything. It was the quietest, truest way I could think of to announce my presence, my return, to the world. The very moment the second screw was tightened, I felt a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying lift from deep within my chest. Then, from my coat pocket, I took out another, smaller plaque. This one wasn't carved, but had words painted on it in careful, steady white letters. I hung it on a small hook I'd installed just below the new nameplate. It read, "A quiet home, beholden to none. Dog you." When I was finished, I took a few steps back down the path to look at my work. The small house, the simple nameplate, the little sign with its quiet declaration. It was all modest, unassuming. But every piece of it, from the sturdy door to the letters of my own name, whispered the same message to my soul. This is my place. I belong here. I no longer had to worry about being in someone else's way. I no longer had to make myself smaller to fit into a space that was never meant for me. Here, within these walls, I could live without apology. I took off my hat and held it over my heart, bowing my head for a long moment. It wasn't a gesture for any passing neighbor to see. It was a silent, personal act of reverence. A thank you to the man I used to be, the one who had worked so hard to buy this house in the first place, and an even deeper thank you to my dear, departed Helen, whose love and wisdom had given me this second chance. As I stood there, a final ray of the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft, golden light that made the letters on the new nameplate glow. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was sitting on my porch swing, sipping a cup of hot tea. The air had a distinct chill to it, the first real hint of autumn's arrival. The leaves on the old maple tree in my front yard were just beginning to turn, from green to a fiery orange. It was quiet, peaceful, and then I heard it. The sound of a car engine, followed by the familiar sound of my grandson's laughter. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door, but I didn't open it. I stood just inside, listening through the screen, feeling the scene unfold through sound alone. I heard the rattle of a rolling suitcase, the thud of cardboard boxes being set down on the pavement, and the occasional, weary sigh from my son Michael. Outside, his family was packing up their car. It seemed they were moving. Oh, wait! "This box is still inside," I heard Sarah say, her voice strained. "It's okay, take your time." "Just be careful," Michael replied. My grandson, Jason, stopped at the end of the driveway and turned to look back at the house. He was looking at the small persimmon tree I had planted for him when he was born, its branches now bare. "Are we never coming back here?" he asked, his little voice filled with a genuine sadness. His mother paused for a long moment before answering. "We'll see, sweetie. Maybe we can visit again someday," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with an unmistakable note of guilt. After the last box was loaded, Michael stood for a moment and looked toward my front door. I felt his gaze, a silent, searching look, but I didn't step outside. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, a flood of complicated, unspoken emotions would overwhelm us both. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if bowing to the house itself, and then turned and got into the car. As the car began to pull away from the curb, Jason rolled down the back window and waved a small hand. "Bye, Grandpa, see you soon," he called out. On pure instinct, I pushed the screen door open just a crack and raised my hand. In a small, hesitant wave, I couldn't find my voice, but a strange, painful warmth spread through my chest. The moment their car turned the corner and disappeared from sight, I stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the cool, crisp air. I had come back to this house not to push anyone away, but simply to reclaim my own space, my own life. But farewells, no matter the circumstances, always carry a certain weight of sorrow. "Godspeed," I whispered to the empty street. Even though they were gone, I knew that the sound of their laughter, the memory of their presence, would always linger somewhere in the corners of this old house. And perhaps, for now, that was enough. I had left the living room curtains open just a sliver, and as I glanced out, my heart skipped a beat. A figure was standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. It was Michael. He was wearing a light jacket, clearly not warm enough for the autumn evening, and he stood with his hands in his pockets, just staring. He was looking up at the nameplate I had installed by the door. Miller. My name, restored to its rightful place. He seemed to be reading it over and over, his head tilted as if he were asking it a question he didn't know how to voice. I held my breath, my own reflection a faint ghost in the window pane. I couldn't look away. Slowly, hesitantly, he walked up the path and stopped in front of the door. He stood before the doorbell for a long, silent moment. I saw him raise his hand, his finger extended, ready to press the button. But he stopped. He couldn't do it. He clenched his hand into a fist, then let it fall to his side. He just stood there on my porch, a solitary figure shrouded in the twilight. His shoulders slumped in defeat. From my place behind the curtain, I whispered the words to the empty room. "It's all right, son. You can ring the bell. I'm not angry anymore." But the words couldn't reach him. After another moment, he turned to leave. As he did, his eyes fell upon the smaller, painted sign hanging just below my name. A quiet home, beholden to none. I saw his lips move, forming a silent word. Maybe he was saying something to himself. Or maybe, in that single phrase, he had found the answer he was looking for. I gently closed the curtain. There were no tears in my eyes, just a lingering ache in my chest, a feeling that was both warm and painful, all at once. All it takes to bridge the chasm between a father and a son is a simple, "I'm home." And yet, I knew better than anyone how impossibly far away that simple phrase could sometimes be, but I would wait. I would believe in the day that my doorbell would finally ring. Perhaps that was my last and only job as a father. Once the sound of the car had completely faded, and a deep quiet had settled over the house once more, I gently closed the front door. I looked up and saw the late afternoon sun slanting through the transom window, casting long, dusty patterns on the hardwood floor. I went to the kitchen and opened the old wooden cabinets. I took out the few dishes that remained, the ones Helen and I had used every day, and began to wash and dry them, one by one, arranging them back on the shelves. As I placed a familiar teacup back in its spot, I had the strange and comforting sensation that she was standing right beside me, humming a quiet tune. "Well," I said out loud, just to hear a voice, "I think I'll make some soup for dinner." There was no reply, of course. But strangely, I didn't feel lonely. The refrigerator was empty. So I took a small wicker basket and walked down to the corner market. I bought a single leek, a potato, and a small carton of vegetable broth. On the way back, a breeze rustled the curtains in the open kitchen window, carrying the distant sound of children playing in a nearby park. I filled a small pot with water and set it on the stove. As I chopped the vegetables, the familiar, rhythmic sound of the knife on the cutting board was deeply soothing. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the warm, savory aroma of simmering soup. Soup, a piece of toast, and a glass of water. It was the simplest of meals, but I set a place for myself at the small kitchen table with care. I smoothed the placemat, folded a paper napkin, and sat down. "Thank you for this meal," I said quietly to no one in particular, before taking the first spoonful. It was not a special soup. There was nothing remarkable about the taste. But the warmth of it spread through my chest, a simple, honest comfort that seemed to seep right into my bones. As I ate, I looked around the room at the faded color of the ceiling, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the small water stain in the corner that had been there for 20 years. Everything was just as it had been. "I'm glad I came home," I murmured. As if in reply, a small wind chime Helen had hung by the window tinkled softly. A clear, sweet sound. Guided by that sound, I stood up and carried my bowl to the sink, washing it with the same care I had taken in preparing the meal. The life ahead of me would be quiet. It would be slow. But it would be mine. It would be a life I could savor, on my own terms, with dignity. I believed that with all my heart. Drying my hands on a dish towel, I looked out the window into the growing darkness and said it again, this time with a deep bow of my head. "Thank you." Early that fall, I found a postcard in my mailbox. The front was a crayon drawing of a little house with a big tree, and two stick figures, a small boy and an old man with glasses, holding hands. On the back, in a child's wobbly printing, were a few simple words. "Dear Grandpa, W.E. have a picture of you in my playroom now. Mummy said you can come over anytime. She said you have a room here now." Reading it, I felt something in my chest that had been clenched tight for months, finally, gently, let go. When I thought about it, I realized I hadn't asked for anything in all this time. I had simply sought out my own place, tried to stand on my own 2 feet again. But maybe that single, quiet choice had been enough to change the direction of the wind. I sat on my porch swing with the postcard resting on my knee and watched the clouds drift across the afternoon sky. The air was soft, and it seemed to carry the faint, familiar scent of the years when Helen was still here. I smiled. Having a place to call home, maybe this is what it truly means. It isn't just about living under the same roof. It's about knowing that you have a permanent place in someone's heart. From that day on, I started sorting through the old house, the one that still held so many echoes of the life Helen and I had shared. While clearing out the garage, I came across my old woodworking tools and a stack of forgotten lumber. A thought came to me, unbidden. Maybe I could teach the neighborhood kids how to build things. I remembered something Helen used to say, back when she was well. "Your hands are a little clumsy, Arthur, but they're so warm." I think children would love them. Decades had passed since then. Maybe now, I had become a little less clumsy. The next month, I tacked a small, handwritten flyer to the community bulletin board at the local library. Woodworking for kids. Learn to build small projects. All ages welcome. Parent participation encouraged. All tools and materials provided. A few days later, my first students arrived. A young boy with small hands that held the saw with a charming awkwardness, and his mother, who watched him with a proud smile. I leaned down and showed him. "It's not about strength," I said gently. "It's about breathing. Try to listen to the wood as you cut." The class became a small, weekly gathering, but the children who came were always so full of joy and enthusiasm. And in their laughter, in the simple, satisfying work of our hands, I discovered a kind of quiet happiness I had never known before. At the end of each class, the kids would shout their goodbyes. "See you next week, Mr. Miller. I'm gonna build a race car next time." Sometimes, I would glance over at the mantel, at the photo of Helen watching over us all. I would whisper to her, "I'm taking good care of the home you left for me. I promise." My new habit is to sit on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea. In those quiet moments, I sometimes look at my phone and see a new picture from my daughter-in-law. A photo of my grandson holding up a drawing he made. "Jason wanted me to send this to you," the message will say. And I think to myself, this is good. This is enough. We may never live under the same roof again, but if we can live in the same heart, that is all that matters. To live without imposing on anyone and without blaming anyone. To live quietly, at my own pace. This house is no longer the home of a father who gave up. It is the home of a father who still has something to share. My story isn't over. Not yet. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my soul, that the little postcard was more than just words on paper. It was the sound of a small family finding its voice again and asking, "Can we please connect?" And so today, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the sound of children's laughter, I am quietly, peacefully living my time as a father. Some homes are built of brick and concrete. Others are built of kindness and memory. The father in this story chose to leave. Not because he didn't love his child, but because he quietly understood that it is better to stand on your own feet than to remain in a place where you are not respected. A parent will often step back without a word, without making demands, simply to allow their children to live their own lives more fully. But for that very reason, please, if you have a parent in your life, take a moment to ask yourself if you are truly welcoming them as a member of your family. Have you ever felt like you had no place in the home you helped create? If so, leave a comment below. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. May every warm room one day become a place of welcome for someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe. In our next story, you might just find something that speaks to your own heart.